Good afternoon. Thank you so much to everyone at the Little Patuxent Review and to the Writer Center for putting this on. And also thank you to all the other readers today. It is really humbling coming after so many beautiful words. I will read from my short story, Gossamer, which appeared in the summer issue of Little Patuxent Review. On one of my last nights in Baltimore, snow sifted down in an early storm of the season, and I was settled into the darkness of the house, alone for once and not expecting to see anyone, when there was a knock on the door, and there was Matthew. The last time I'd seen him was in the summer when we broke up. I didn't know what to do, so I just stood there in the doorway, cold creeping past me into the house from the frosty slush outside, as I watched his outstretched arm lower and his smile fade. I was waiting for an explanation. He told me Jax was gone. The old house felt cold even with him in it, the radiators not keeping up with the frost that had swept in as I'd watched his face. I felt sorry for the dog. When do you think he got away? I asked. I let him out after work, he said, but he didn't come back after a few minutes. I checked the yard and he was gone. You have to help me find him, Liz. He had always been there with us, and now that Matthew and I were standing next to each other again without Jax, it seemed wrong that there was no scratchy snout tugging on our sleeves. The ground was a glass pane. It had been sleeting all afternoon. Around me, a crystal city covered in frosty pools of slush and ice. I tried to picture Jax somewhere in the city, his fur, his hairy snout, matted with ice, but I couldn't imagine it. The dark stretched the distances between blocks, Charm City seeming an endless maze of shadowy buildings, frozen streets. I felt so small I could disappear with no trace. Matthew caught my arm when I almost slipped walking toward the neighborhood park on 39th. After that, we held on to each other, testing every step for ice in the muddy snow, his hands warming my fingertips. When I first moved to the city, Matthew had shown me around with elaborate plans, but a few months in, we took Matthew's truck up toward the reservoir with Jax in the middle of a January snowstorm. Matthew had said he could tell I wanted to be away from the city for a while, to expand in an open space. We'd pulled over a few miles down from the park entrance because the road wasn't plowed and that was as far as we could get driving. Jax dodged ahead of us, collapsing into deep pools of powdery snow, emerging with white pyramids on his nose and eyebrows, his ruddy fur glazed white. The forest was candlelit. Everywhere, snow reflecting light, holy. We could barely speak, so Jax's jingling tags and our boots swishing through soft powder were the only sounds. In the woods, the snow didn't fall as fast, and we watched glittering flakes sift between branches, fall into the bark of trees, pine boughs, the wool of our hats. I had been giddy, cheeks red from excitement as much as the cold. I kept us walking for what felt like hours. We finally stopped when we reached a ridge overlooking the gray water of Gunpowder Falls. There, under a pine, Matthew had pulled me into him, moving my hands into his jacket, and kissed me until I was dizzy. His lips and tongue and hands on my face were warm, and kissing him was like slipping into a bath. All around us, it smelled like soil and tree sap. When my teeth started chattering, he pulled a thermos and flask from his backpack, hot chocolate and rye. We drank it as Jax tumbled back and forth between trees, stopping only to pant at our feet. Back at the car, Matthew wrapped me and Jax in blankets for the ride home. I fell asleep on the drive, didn't even wake up when we got back, and Matthew carried me inside. I thought it might have been a dream when I woke up later, still lulled from a night of dazzling snow and all that heat. Now, our short walk had been enough to soak through my shoes. It began to sleet again as we reached the creek at the far end of the park, and we watched snow dripping down twigs and thin branches crashing onto the frozen creek below. We could barely see and walked back toward town. It was too wet to reflect any light, too wet for the slush to fall noiselessly. Our voices echoed off glazed buildings and icy cars in the empty streets as we called and whistled for Jax. "He's never been gone this long," Matthew said, and I knew we were both worried about what we couldn't say. Was he lost forever? In the city, there were so many things that could have gone wrong. Instead, I said, "We'll find him." And as I said it, it felt true that anything was possible, that we'd all be just fine. Thank you.